Welcome back, everybody, to episode 22 of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Jake Burdett, joined by the other co-host and president of Progressive Democrats of Howard County, Huri Hodgu. How you doing today, Huri?
Hi, Jake. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last episode of the year. We promised that we will do one more before the end of the year. And so we're happy to record this just in time. Very good, Jake. How about you? How are you?
I'm doing well, enjoying my time off between semesters in law school before the new year and the new semester begins. And it's good timing too, because there's some incredibly important things going on in Howard County right now. So I have a little bit of time to address it, and that is sort of why we have our two guests today on from either currently on the Prince George's County Board of Education or formerly on the Prince George's County Board of Education. But we're going to summarize why we have them on, because there's some things going on with our Board of Education in Howard County that are concerning that both of these guests can share some of their experiences with. So with no further ado, if the both guests could give a short introduction of who they are, when they were elected, etc. I guess we could start with Raaheela.
Sure. It's so nice to be joining you all today for this podcast on this very important issue. For those that may not know me, my name is Raaheela Ahmed. I was elected to the Prince George's County Board of Education in November of 2016 and was on the board for a little over 5 years. And so I've seen kind of how the structure of the school board in Prince George's County with appointed members has affected the operations of the board and also has affected the types of work that have been accomplished. And so I'm really excited to talk to you all about that. But beyond my role, I'm no longer on the Prince George's Board of Education. Beyond that role, I work for a national nonprofit where we focus on institutionalizing voting on college campuses across the country. It's quite fulfilling work, quite necessary work, but I'm excited to bring that lens to our conversation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Raaheela. And yeah, I'm now realizing both of you are relatively young, so it's good that you had a younger Board of Ed in Prince George's. But David, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a stretch, we were probably the youngest school board in America. It was difficult to verify. There's so many school districts. David Murray, I was elected along with Raaheela in 2016 and reelected in 2020. I still serve on the board. So I've been on there about just finishing 6 years. Outside of the school board, I work at American University as a program manager, coaching future teachers in a partnership we have in DC schools. And before that, I was a special education teacher. So really happy to bring that perspective. But you also touched on it, bringing like a younger perspective to our school board as well. We think it's important. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, thank you for both coming on. And just before we get back to both of them and sort of what they went through in Prince George's County, I want to set the stage of what's going on right now in Howard County with our Board of Education, in case you have not been following the news in the last month or so. But the reason why we're having David and Raaheela on is basically, as long as I have known anyways, Howard County has had 7 elected Board of Education members. And the way that we've elected them has changed over time in the past couple of years. I think we used to elect all 7 at large in the same year. And I think in 2018, they made a switch to still keep 7 elected Board of Ed members, but instead of having all 7 be elected at large, only 2 are elected at large and 5 are elected by county council districts. So we still have 7 members, but just elected differently. And also, when the at-large members and district members would be elected would be staggered. So you have the 5 district members elected in 2020 in presidential years, and then the at-large members elected in midterm years. And so we did our first run of that election structure in 2020, and the establishment either would not have control because they weren't always good at winning the at-large county-wide seats, or the establishment would have control by like 1 seat. And so Seemingly that was not enough control for the establishment, and they had another chance to win a solid majority in this cycle with the 2 at-large seats in 2022. And they had 2 establishment candidates running, and seemingly only one of them won while one of them lost. And so the establishment, they do actually have a majority on the Board of Education right now, but it's only by 1 vote. And they don't like that the SMOB changes every year, and the SMOB is an unreliable vote for them. And so they would, for the establishment and their money donors, namely private developers, to be able to still maintain control over the Board of Education, they much prefer being able to have appointed Board of Ed members instead of elected members who they can control easier. And so literally right after the general election, our state delegation introduces this surprise bill out of nowhere, changing our structure from the 5 elected members at large and 2 elected members, or I'm sorry, 5 elected members by district and 2 elected at large, changing that to replacing the 2 elected at large with 2 appointed members by the county executive. And it would be based on state Senate district instead of county council district. So actually we would still keep the elected at large members, but we would no longer have the elected county council district members. And so we would have 2 appointed members and then 5 elected instead of 7 elected members. And so there's a lot of suspicion that this was done as a clear power grab for the county executive and his special interest donors to just maintain more influence over the Board of Education. And further fueling that theory was the fact that this was introduced right after the general election, right after both of the establishment candidates for Board of Ed didn't win, and right after the establishment county executive won re-election. They knew that they could trust him to appoint members that will be loyal to him. But we do not think if Alan Kittleman had won his challenge for county executive, we absolutely do not think that this bill would have been proposed, because they would not have trusted Alan Kittleman to appoint Board of Ed members. And so that's basically the gist of it. They're trying to replace our elected Board of Ed members with 2 appointed members, or add that on top of them. Hiri, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I just want to add, because Jake, you mentioned the county executive and the establishment wants to control the Board of Education, and people may ask, how would the county executive controlling the Board of Education benefit developers? And there have, over the years, there have been so the Board of Education can have an impact in 2 ways to the overall county. One is in the way that it asks, request the budget. At least in Howard County, every year they request a budget, and if they a compliant Board of Education can will basically ask what it's told by the county executive, at the time when they request the budget. So if the school really needs X amount of dollars, hundreds X, I don't know, like $200 million, then the Board of Education would ask like 150, just as an example. Another way that the board has an impact is it can raise concerns about zoning and land use decisions that have an impact on the schools. So if the county wants to change the adequate public facilities ordinance, the Board of Education can say, this is good or this is bad, and that still, they don't have a power to change it, but that still has weight in terms of how people can perceive the benefit of the proposed bill. So a compliant Board of Education is really beneficial to help in crafting favorable zoning and land use decisions for the county, for the developers, and also making sure that the county executive does not look bad at the time the county requests the board requests the budget for the school system's budget. And so this is why I think, and I think a lot of people think, that the county executive requested this. This very important. State Delegate Courtney Watson and State Senator Clarence Lamb say that they introduced this by themselves, but there's a widespread consensus that it was the county executive who requested this, and they're doing this at his behest. And so it's because they would not do this out of nowhere. It's because it was requested. So that's why I think it's it's important for people to understand why it would benefit the county executive and the developers that this is happening. So I just wanted to add that, and so we have an existing example of why this is a bad idea, and so we can sort of have go ahead, Jake.
And so here he makes that point of that's why this power grab is happening, and even though it's being introduced by the state delegation chairs, it really is being done at the behest of the county executive. And so when this, and we should add, they tried to do this like 10 years ago. They tried to add appointed members, and it was met with similar pushback, and they had to abandon the idea. But so similarly, when they introduced this by surprise right after the general election, it was met with similar widespread community pushback from just about every political corner in the county. You had very conservative groups, progressive groups like ours. As Shiri said, literally only one person in the whole county testified in support of the bill. And so there was a rally against this bill when they had a hearing a couple weeks ago. And the bill sponsors, they heard the criticism. They probably were expecting it, in fact. And so what they tried to do the day before the hearing was they put out a letter. They sent an email to anybody who had signed up to testify. That by that point, they said, hey, look, we hear the criticism. Actually, they didn't say we hear the criticisms. They say we hear the community discussion around the bill. And then they said, and so we're going to be responsive because we care so much about, what our people in our community want. And so you don't like the appointed members, fine. We're still going to keep the appointed members, but we're also going to keep all the elected members. So none of the elected members will be replaced, but we're just going to add 2 appointed members. We can keep it by county council district. We can keep it by at large, but we're still going to add appointed members. And you guys are okay with that, right? Because it wasn't the principle of appointed members, right? It was just the details of the way they were being done. But clearly it was the principle of appointed members that everybody's against. And the bill sponsors know that. And so this is just a BS excuse that they're trying to use. And then the other thing that they proposed in their amendments was they said on top of, instead of replacing elected members with appointed members and just adding appointed members, they're also going to move to have our public financed elections program include the Board of Education races, which I would absolutely support, and also push for increasing Board of Ed member pay so that it's actually reflective of full-time job and people can do it as a full-time job. So both of those changes I would support, but the problem is they combine them with the poison pill of the appointed members so that it's easier to frame. If you're against appointed members, they can also frame you as being against public financed Board of Education elections. So there's a lot of dirty tricks that they're using to try to get this passed. And it was also strategic on their end to wait until the day before the hearing to propose those changes so that they can act like all the criticism at the hearing was to the original form of the bill and not the amended form. So even though this was in the news a lot, it got a lot of negative press. I am not at all confident that they are over this attempt to get this bill passed. I think they have until around mid-February to pass this bill. So all that's to say is this is still a terrible bill. Any bill that includes appointed members on the Board of Education is a non-starter, in my opinion. And I'm not confident that they're not going to still try to push this through. And so that's why we have on our two guests today, David Miri and Raaheela Ahmed, both of whom, you know, as we said, they tried this move in Prince George's County, and it went terribly for the county, I would say. And so we're going to speak to both of them about exactly what happened, what was the heart of the conflict. And so I guess either David or Raaheela, I think you were both elected in 2016, you said. What was the dynamic leading up to, I guess, spoiler alert, in the end, they tried to do basically a bullshit ethics report against you all to try to get you removed or put you scandal ridden. But before it got to that point, you know, what was the dynamic? Like, I imagine there was some conflict like leading up to that. What was it like a progressive wing and an establishment wing? What were sort of the dynamics there?
So, Raaheela, please feel free to start. In addition to that, can you explain the structure right now, or you know, the Board of Education, the composition in Prince George's County as well, please?
Sure. So really the big structural change that happened to the Prince George's County Board of Education occurred in 2013. Prior to 2013, there were 9 elected board members representing different districts and a student member of the board. So 10 members total with 9 elected through district elections. In 2013, they pulled, and I'm quoting from a news article, the Baker takeover bill. County Executive Rushern Baker was our exec at the time, and helped spearhead some efforts to change the structure of the school board to include a number of appointed members to the Board of Education, along with changing the power of the superintendent, now known as CEO of the school district. And so with that structural change, what occurred was that we still had 9 elected board members from different districts. But in addition to that, there were a number of appointed board members as well, that led to a number of 13 total, plus 1 student board member. So we're looking at 14 members at this time. One of those members was appointed, one of the appointed members would have been appointed by the county council, and the others would be appointed by the county executive, with the additional caveat that the board chair and the board vice chair would be appointed by the county executive as well. And so we had a structure that really significantly changed in 2013 and has only recently gone through legislation to be changed in minor, small ways in recent years, but in this, I think just this recent year. But that is kind of the structure that both David and I operated in when we were elected to office in 2016. I should note, David, myself, and another one of our colleagues, Edward Burrows, all ran when we were 18 or 19 years old for our respective seats in 2010, and then David and Ed in 2010, and then myself, David and Ed in 2012. And so there was this kind of emerging group of young people that were running and seeking Board of Education seats in 2012, and were in 2010 fairly successful, and in 2012 completely successful in obtaining those seats. And so I think that type of power dynamic shift that began to appear in 2012 and slowly over time came to be a majority of the board in 2020, really caused a lot of tensions and a lot of power dynamics, power grabs that were in play that led to kind of the really problematic situations that you have now been hearing about in terms of Prince George's County Board of Education. I'll pause and see if David wants to add some more things around this, but there was just, we honestly dealt with a lot. We dealt with a lot during our time on the board, and it had everything to do with the way that power was trying to be held by the status quo establishment.
Yeah, I think Raaheela really hit on all the points. I mean, there were a lot of drawbacks to the way they drew up the structure. I mean, we have a really ungainly, unwieldy board. Like, we have 14 members right now. It's difficult to do anything because you just have too many people there. So, you know, even if you all keep all your elected members, if you have a whole bunch of appointed, it's kind of diluting it, raising the vote count needed to pass motions. And while we finally had a majority in 2020, we had 7 of the 9 elected seats, and that's what we needed to outweigh those appointed seats. We would have had a majority in 2018, I think it was, when we had 5 of the 9 elected seats. Like, that should have already been a majority. So what you can have in effect is you could hold the majority of the elected seats, and those members could still be in the minority when they link up with the appointeds. And so, I mean, it's just a really undemocratic system. It goes against everything that our democracy is supposed to be founded upon. We don't appoint governors, we don't appoint county executives, we don't appoint council people, but for some reason with school board, the politicians are like, trust us, we got it. And the voters are all of a sudden not smart enough to elect school board members, but they're smart enough to elect them. And kind of the reality that they don't want to address is that the voters know exactly who the candidates are, and they just prefer these other people. Like, politicians already have an outsized voice in electing people, as you know. Like, in the school board race, I'm sure the politicians endorsed whoever, gave money, ran slates, worked polls. That's the time to have your voice heard. It's in the election. You already have an advantage, you know, as elected officials and who you're supporting. So, like, win those elections. And if you don't, work with people who win. But changing the rules every time you don't win elections, I mean, it's just completely undermines like the faith in like local politics and democracy.
Yeah, thanks, David and Raaheela. I think the fact that they get to appoint, really, the establishment gets to appoint the 4, you know, regardless of who, you know, whether it's the county council or the county executive, they get to appoint 4. And then most importantly, the county executive gets to appoint the chair and vice chair is very critical in, at least, you know, in your structure. And then you mentioned, you know, so they have the 4, all they need to focus on is 3 more seats. And, you know, the insurgents or the progressive candidates they need to focus on 7 seats. There's a complete imbalance. And I see that potentially happening in Howard County too, because they get to appoint, the county executive gets to appoint 2, and all they need to work on is 3 more seats. But the other side needs to get 5 more seats. So there's a huge power imbalance, you know, there. And the state senator Clarence Lamb and state delegate Courtney Watson described, they complained that the existing structure has become parochial, in that the elected members kept, you know, when they get elected by a district, they're only focusing on their own district and not the system-wide school system. So the system-wide, the welfare of the entire school system. Can you explain, or do you find any? I certainly find issues with that observation. But do you find, you know, any issues with that observation in terms of, you know, why is parochial, like, not, at least to me, it's not appropriate? But like, do you agree with that or not?
I can jump in first on that. I haven't seen too much issue with it on our board, in my opinion. Like, district members are supposed to represent their district. It's not a bad thing to take the charge on advocating for what your district needs. I mean, that's what all elected officials do. It's what she does. Like, I'm sure she spends majority of her time advocating for her district in Annapolis, as opposed to the rest of the county or state. But outside of that, you know, no one member can do too much on their own. So it's not like you get the right to just allocate funds and move things around. Like, you have to do it with a majority vote anyways. You have to do it with a team. So we haven't really had any issues with it, in my opinion. If anything, I think it's been important to make sure that like all communities are represented and have voices at the table, because they have those elected members who are directly held accountable to those communities. So, and I've found it to be a big benefit versus like at-large members.
Yeah, I wouldn't add much more to what David has already said. I did want to touch upon something here that you had mentioned earlier on in the podcast, and that is kind of around you know, kind of the relationship between appointed members and what can happen on a board of education. I will say between 2013 and now, one of the big kind of changes that have occurred with the addition of appointed members and with the support of the county executive has been moving Prince George's County and passing a large public-private partnership deal for school construction. And so when we're talking about the school district has a lot of money that goes towards construction projects, it's true. There are tens of millions of dollars at stake when it comes to school construction. And what happened in the past couple of years is a huge push, a huge effort to ensure that we can build our schools quickly and quickly, pretty much. And the way that the establishment thought that this is an option of what to do is through public-private partnerships. What that costs our school district is $2 billion over the course of 30 years. And so I will be paying the taxes for these schools for the next 30 years. And probably my kids will be paying the taxes for these schools over the next 30 years. And so this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about the relationship between appointed members, developers, and the operations and the votes of the Board of Education. This is how it played out in Prince George's County. I'll even say on the traditional financing sense, we as a Board of Education within the past couple of years, I don't know if it was last year or the year before that, we actually voted to try and have a more accountable traditional school construction budget, where we passed amendments that would have saved us tens of millions of dollars in administrative fees for some of these projects. And the majority of our colleagues agreed, and we voted, and there was a majority vote to agree on those things, but those amendments did not move forward in the process, and so they were not implemented. And I think that goes to show again how the effectiveness of confusion around voting, the confusion around what is the law if it's not a straightforward law, and the impact of having appointed individuals in the superintendency, appointed individuals on the board, working with the county executive to move something forward, how that has an effect on your tax-paying money. And so that's when we're talking about construction, these are the two examples that come to mind within the past couple of years. And we're talking about how that literally directly affects the money books and the pockets of Prince George's residents.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, Raaheela, because to be quite honest with you, that is absolutely a fear of mine that they're going to try to push for in Howard County. I believe Prince George's County was the first in the nation to build a high school with a PPP model. And similarly, in Howard County, we set the record for being, I think, the first county to fund a courthouse using a PPP model, which is, you know, a similar disaster. And we've had council members talking about we need to start looking into PPP models to build these schools. And what's so frustrating about it is these politicians suggesting the PPP model as a response to the school overcrowding crisis. These same elected officials caused this school overcrowding crisis. The developers presenting themselves as the solutions were the ones that caused the school overcrowding crisis in the first place. So they made a bunch of money and had a lot of success causing the problems, and now they're presenting themselves as the solutions. And so I do have a real concern that is one thing they will try to push for in Howard County if they're successful with getting these appointed members on. But I'm curious, Raaheela, were there any other points of contention between, I'll call them the progressive bloc and the establishment wing? Because the timing seems very interesting to me. You said that you all started to make gains on the Board of Education in 2012. You didn't quite have a majority then, but you started to make gains. And then the next year is when the bill to restructure and add the appointed members comes. So I'm guessing the powers that be were forecasting that David, yourself, Ed had a very different vision for what you wanted to do with the school system than what they wanted to do. So aside from the PPP, were there any other big points of contention where you all disagreed?
I mean, honestly, Jake, I felt like every idea that we had to try and change anything was met with pushback. Maybe David could elaborate more, but from the get, it really felt like I heard a lot of no's. No, Raaheela, no, Miss Ahmed, you can't do that. You got to think about this. And, a lot of times I think that when you're newly elected, you may not know all of the things and there's a learning process there. But if we're still talking about, no, Miss Ahmed, you can't do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years going in, like this is a whole different type of situation, right? So I really felt like we got a lot of pushbacks. We had a lot of really great budget amendments that we were trying to push through on multiple cycles that faced pushback that directly affected the positive outcomes academically for our students and otherwise. I think beyond that, even some of the policies that we were trying to push forward, we got some pushback on those as well. So it felt like at every single level and angle, there was some type of a pushback of like, oh, maybe this is not the way we do things. And we shouldn't be doing things this way. And it's hard because I think with the lack of transparency in the structure, it's hard to tell where that opposition is fully coming from, right? So maybe it is coming from individual appointed board members, or maybe it's coming from the county executive. Who really knows, right? I think one of the interesting things that I want to flag for you all is Fox 5 actually did a story where they kind of went behind the curtain and talked with a person who was going through the appointment process and kind of had a revelation that they presented that during that appointment process, at least for that individual, they were asking questions or they were saying things like the county executive or the office might be calling you to let you know what we want to accomplish when it comes to certain things. One of those things mentioned was school construction. And so when we're talking about the back room conversations that are happening, those came to light. And so it's not hard to believe or hard to imagine why at this point, after seeing that type of an article come through, the intentions or the reasoning for why some of the appointed board members might be voting together. In the instances of Prince George's County, there were many, many, many times where the appointed board members voted together on issues that maybe were not always in the direction that they may have wanted to go. And so that's another thing to consider in this equation.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. Yeah, I mean, appointed members would fight us on absolutely everything from big things to small things. And to kind of your all's point about the establishment, the status quo, essentially that's the point of appointed members in general. Is typically just to keep what's going, because believe it or not, school systems make a lot of people rich. Our budget is over 2 billion. Yours is probably getting towards 2 billion. So a lot of people are making a lot of money. County execs can get staff stashed over there, can get friends in there, and they're just looking for no blowback, really. And when you get like independent people into school boards, I mean, I'm an educator. When I look at our school system, like, yeah, I do have a lot of critiques of it, but critiques don't make for like high approval ratings for county executives. Like, they really just want a board that's going to turn and look at them and say, this is the best county executive. They're giving us every dollar we need. Every kid is learning how to read. Everything is great. And that's really all they're looking for. And so they don't want the accountability. They don't want the discussion, and they're not really interested in improving. They're really just interested in continuing it going forward. And so that's why we have a clash on pretty much every issue. And I would anticipate your elected members would with the appointeds as well.
Wow. Yeah, just a lot like a lot of keywords, trigger points, trigger words I've heard: transparency, budget. The county executive might be calling you to talk to you about, what he or she might want. So I was I asked the state delegate Courtney Watson about the proposed appointment process. You may or may know that you may or may not know this. At least in Howard County, they have an appointment process for planning board and other government administrative positions or commissions. So you're supposed to apply. You're supposed to send in your application. There's an email. And it's a public process. Ultimately, though, who gets picked, in terms of in terms of the vetting process and how they select them, it's still a black box. And we know that the county executive ultimately gets to pick who he wants. They have someone, they have the people that they want to elect or they want to pick, send in their resumes. They may or may not send in their resumes actually, but ultimately they get picked. The delegate Courtney Watson assured the people, including me, who are asking these questions, that this will be a separate process, not the existing county process. So they will appoint a commission or like an appointment commission, and they will get resumes, and then they will, vet the people, and then they'll pick them. But the names that will be sent, the names ultimately get sent to the county executive, who gets to pick, who gets to appoint them. So ultimately, it's still the same process. And I think ultimately, I think people, it's really beneficial that Raaheela, you mentioned, the county executive will contact the appointee at any time and say, hey, I want you to do this. I want you to vote on this to benefit, because I want, this is what I want. So people should be aware of that. And so, I wanted to highlight that. And another thing that I wanted to highlight, and then I'll ask you, David and Raaheela, to comment on, is in Howard County, the establishment has painted itself as this progressive bloc, like this, like they go out there and they tell people, hey, we're progressive here, they've really co-opted that label. And one of the reasons PDHC was formed, Progressive Democrats of Howard County, is to really highlight the difference between what being a progressive means and what being a corporate Democrat means. And I feel like we've done that to a certain extent, but I do want to take this opportunity for because you guys mentioned transparency, money, these are the things that people, the corporate Democrats, like to sort of hide in terms of, when they try to do something, they hide. And can you describe in terms of in Prince George's County and at least your general impression of being progressive, and how that has had an impact in on the board, and the differences between your position and the corporate Democrats on the board. I will start with David.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back to wanting to do something. Like, if I want to improve, only 1 in 3 kids can read on grade level in our school district, and the other side essentially just doesn't. I mean, I don't know if it's doesn't because we bring it up, or doesn't because it's too difficult, or doesn't want to do it because it won't look good. I mean, when it comes down to school board issues, at least on our board, that's kind of where the dichotomy is. Like, if the outcomes aren't good for our kids, they're not good for our teachers, like they're not good for our residents, like what are we going to do about it? And like, progressive means we have to make progress. So our goal is to make progress. Like, we didn't run just to sit up there, collect a check and like pat ourselves on the back. Like, we really want to deliver for people. There's a lot of families that really rely on our public schools as their only place that they can send their child, to give them everything they need in life. So if I don't feel like we're doing that, like, I'm going to speak up loudly and forcefully to try to make sure that that happens. And at least for me, that's kind of where the tension has come from progressive versus, I mean, corporate Democrat or whatever you kind of want to call it, just there to vote yes on what they're asked to vote on.
Yeah, I would add, I think a lot of the, because I've, been a part of many different campaign cycles on the ground and have heard the same types of situations of elected officials calling themselves progressive, which I probably wouldn't be thinking, that would not be the word that came to mind when I thought of those people, right? Or individuals particularly. But I think it's almost a definition, a different understanding of what defines progressive. For me, progressive is we're constantly moving the goalpost. Okay, we could be doing better. We need to be all the way over here, right? We're thinking 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line, this is where we need to be. And we're working towards something that's there. Whereas other folks may think, okay, I passed something that is on the way to there, or supported something that's on the way to there, and now I'm progressive, right? Or I'm keeping up with the times, and so that makes me progressive, because I'm keeping up with the times. And I don't think that those two are the same thing, right? And that's where I think a lot of folks maybe get scared, right? Oh no, we can't do, you're talking about, we're trying to get, our school set up so that we have, one of the things that we were passing that we focus on were some curricular changes. So ethnic studies in our schools, and making that a mandatory requirement. Financial literacy, you want to change curriculum in such a, important way and have all these new requirements. That's like a lot. That's like too much. No, it's not too much. We can do it. These are things that folks need to learn, and that we need to move in this direction so that we can have a culturally responsive community at the end of the day, right? 10, 20, 30 years down the line, everyone should be knowing these things and understanding that this is how America came to be. And this is the value that people of color or other marginalized communities add and have played a role in that, endeavor. So in my head, it's a difference of definition. But in my belief, the true progressives are the ones that are thinking 15, 20, 30 years down the line. What do we need? Where do we need to be at? And what can we do now to set us up to get there quickly? The issue is that, in the process of the lack of transparency, sometimes with the way things operate, the people that benefit from that lack of transparency, the people that benefit from a lack of really just kind of the people that benefit from kind of a structure that is not operating or functioning optimally and effectively are not the people that elected officials to be there, right? It's the officials themselves, it's the officials' friends, like David had mentioned. And that's the problem, right? That's how you have to work to change the system, but it's not possible when you have appointed members in place that, like Dave had mentioned before, dilute a vote. So we're not even talking about diluting the vote of a body, right? Having a multiple elected members on a board or on a body that vote in matters related to that board is one very important thing that we're talking about, but it's also talking about diluting the voice of the people, right? It's the difficulty with appointed members, and I think the rationale that I've heard in the past of why appointed members are necessary is folks are thinking, okay, we need experts on the board. We need experts sitting at the table making the decisions. Well, folks don't know is that we literally in every school system have hundreds of experts that are coming to the table to make decisions and recommendations before the board. The hard part is learning your community. The hard part is going out there and seeing, what is going on, listening to people. And that's not always what appointed members get. When you're running for office, when you're running for school board, particularly, I can speak from my experience in Prince George's County, you file to run in January, February, maybe even earlier, the year of an election, and then the election happens in November. So you have almost at least a year to be out there in community, to be learning your community, to be learning the issues, so that when the time comes for you to be sworn in, you have a full year. Even if you had no type of background in community, you have a full year of understanding of what does my community want and need. And when you're appointed to a position, you apply, you get in there, and you don't have that background necessarily. And I will tell you, folks, when the appointments are being made, that's not, from my experience, seeing the people that have been appointed, the criteria is not who is a community advocate that I'm going to put up here on this board. No, it's who is an expert, who is someone that's going to be maybe inclined to think or believe the same way that I do, inclined or to think or vote the way that I we're aligned in that. It's more of those types of factors, but it's not about community. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, the problem with appointed members is you need to make sure that the people that are there to represent you, represent your interests, actually try to learn and represent your interests and are ready for that moment. And elections do that, not appointment processes.
Yeah. And, on that point, yeah, I suppose technically I wouldn't have a principled objection to appointed members if I felt that the person making the appointments was like responsible, acting in good faith, had good judgment. But unfortunately, I don't trust the current county executive to do that in their decisions. But, if anything good, if this bill does pass, if anything good comes from it, it's that we might actually get a progressive county executive in 2026, and then we can appoint some progressive members. But hopefully it doesn't pass in the first place. But Raaheela, you brought up some important points of, to you being a progressive, at least part of it is moving the goalposts and pushing the status quo in a positive direction, in a direction that is necessary, probably meeting a lot of needs that needed to be met for a long time, and that, quite frankly, we've had the resources to use to meet them. We just haven't allocated them in that way. But on the other hand, it's the establishment's job, as David said, to preserve the status quo. And one thing that's always so frustrating to me is it's like, as grassroots people or progressives or whatever word you want to use to describe us, people working to actually cause positive community change, we work so hard to get ourselves elected, to get honest community allies in these elected seats of power. And we have to run against, machine candidates who have tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding. And sometimes we still pull it off. And, we beat the odds. We work super hard. You win a majority. You spend years to do it. You all took almost 10 years to win a majority. And after all that hard work, what do? What does the establishment do? They just change the rules. They just, all right, well, you won in those. Okay, well, we're new rules, do over. And then you win in that new system. And then they say, okay, we're changing the rules again. And, it just makes you like, it's very frustrating because like all these gains that we worked so hard for, they're just going to pull the rug from under our feet. But now you all have a progressive majority on your county council, I believe. So, hopefully they have a little bit less power to dilute things. But, I think you both did a very good job, describing what the heart of the conflicts were in Prince George's County. And so to kind of fast forward a little bit, after I guess about 8 years of some infighting, things really escalated. I think it was last year. And if you guys could sort of walk me through what was the grand finale of all this tension with that, I would describe it as a sham ethics report that they tried to file against you. So what were these accusations they tried to make against you guys, and how could you explain how that kind of fell apart and blew up in their face a little bit?
I can try to hit on it briefly. We were accused of so many different things, but essentially, because we had just taken office, there was another election for 2 years. I mean, short of them like figuring out, I don't know, some emergency bill, like they didn't have a mechanism to like stop us from carrying out our agenda, frankly, that we were elected to do. They've just never been in the minority. Like they don't understand, like we've been there, like it's okay, it'll pass, you can still advocate, you should win more elections, but they just weren't okay with it. So they kind of staged a coup. They hired an attorney. They broke a whole bunch of board policies, allocated a lot of taxpayer funds, tens of thousands, to hire attorneys to help an ethics panel write up allegations against us. They accused us of pay to play for working with a labor union, which is a good thing. They accused us of, there were things about reorganizing staff, which is like just in our rights. Like, you know, when elected officials take office, they typically bring people with them and other people phase out. They accused us of voting as a block. I mean, there were just all kinds of really silly things that like people who have been in public office and public spaces understand that like, not only are these things not illegal, they're not even unethical. Some of them are good, but they wrote it up in a fancy way. They tried to send it to the state board and say, hey, remove these people. We just, you know, we have some funny emails from our board leadership, like begging the state board of education for meetings, to meet with them and please help them get us all out really quickly. And the crazy thing about that, I mean, there's 7 of us. So it's only like they tried to remove the majority of an elected body all at one time. That was probably the stupidest thing that they tried to do. Like, that's probably never happened anywhere in America. Like, it's rare that any elected officials get like removed from office, but if they do, it's like one person for doing one thing. You can't remove, you know, can you imagine trying to remove a majority of a county council or a majority of Congress by the minority party? And they're like, no, trust us, all of this is true. And it's like, it seems like you want to get back to the majority. But they were unsuccessful in removing any of us because their allegations didn't have merit and were dismissed by the state. But they were successful to the extent that they kind of did stop us from doing what we got on the board to do, because it just wasn't really possible to fight that legal battle and fight for issues on the dais at the same time. In many ways, you know, they really kind of destroyed our names and kind of called our integrity into question. So we had to spend a lot of time like outward facing on that, kind of explaining away the craziness. So, I mean, it was kind of really genius in that perspective, but just kind of really silly. It's really hard to believe that they were able to get kind of as far as they did with it. But, you know, when you've got the county exec and you've got these appointed members and everyone's kind of moving in the same direction, it's really difficult, you know, to defend yourself. So, you know, it very, very disappointing. Like you said, you know, we spent so long to get to that moment. But, you know, we're trying to regroup. But, you know, at least we were not removed, which we knew we wouldn't be. I mean, I kind of thought it was a joke when Ed called me to tell me like what we were being accused. I was like, taking money from a labor union? It was like the money that the campaign contributions that I reported on my campaign finance account. It's like, how is that different than any elected official taking money from any other union or interest group? Like, just some really, really silly stuff. But I'm sure I left out some stuff for you like could add.
No, David, you got it. You just recapped everything in 3 minutes, which is really quite impressive because honestly, the emotional and mental labor that went into trying to address this was intense and significant, I will say. I think in terms of one additional thing that is currently in process now is a basically administrative hearing case for our appointed board chair, now former appointed board chair, who's still on the Board of Education. A number of us petitioned as citizens to remove her from office. The state Board of Education issued charges of removal, which is a big, big thing. And it does not happen often based upon what we presented. And now we have been for the past couple of months on various days throughout this month and last month, in front of a judge, an administrative judge who is hearing the case and will be concluding with closing arguments next month. This is all public. These are public administrative hearings that are occurring. And then a decision will be made within 90 days of closing arguments, to my understanding, on the future of one of the appointed members of the board. And so this is really, I think, an example of how things can really go awry in a way that maybe nobody had ever thought of or intended. where we have an appointed board member that is literally facing charges of removal, has refused to resign, and we are now in proceedings in front of a judge to address the situation. So the ramifications of having appointed members on a body are significant, and also can play out in unexpected ways, as you can see from the situations that we've dealt with in Prince George's County.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a grueling experience. I can't imagine, if you get elected to make a difference, you get elected to do something to benefit your community, and it's one thing to be met with resistance from the status quo. It's another to employ these kinds of rotten tactics to demoralize, to discourage, to scare. I mean, if you don't have, I mean, you need funds to fight, you need money to fight this, you need time to fight this, and you're not focusing on benefit, you're not focusing on what you're elected to do, and you're focusing on this. It drains your energy. But I mean, that's really part of their playbook. So I mean, corporate, David, you mentioned, whatever you like to call it, corporate Democrats. I mean, that's really, I mean, this is what they do. They are, as much as the GOP, they feel like they are entitled to this government, and they don't want to be held accountable. They benefit from a media that has bought into that symbiotic relationship. They have a symbiotic relationship wherever the media exists. They have a symbiotic relationship, and so the media is not gonna be criticizing what they do. And then on the local level, there's no media, there's no scrutiny, so they can take, they can do whatever they want. I mean, they're breaking laws every day. Like, a zoning law is being broken every day out there. And, we may not think it's important because it's not like, like a criminal law, but it's still a law. Like you just mentioned, Raaheela, this appointed board member does not want to resign and is refusing to resign. Like, that's literally, like, that's entitlement. Like, nobody, like, you're asked to leave, you don't want to leave, that means you're entitled. And so, like, this, I mean, this is their tactic. I get worked up about this, so but yeah, I mean, it's the challenge is, if you're a progressive, and if you're not backed by, the moneyed interest by the developers on the local level, you have an uphill battle to start with. And then once you get elected, once you do all those things that you need to do, and you take, and you have your majority, then they use these kinds of tactics where it may not actually succeed, but still, like, it just derails the agenda, which is benefiting, the public. So really unfortunate, and sorry to hear that, what you guys went through. So I know that there was like a recent proposal to do away with the bill, or with the structure in Prince George's County. Is that what's the status of that? And can you explain how? Can you explain where it is, and what how it's changing? We'll start with Raaheela.
Yeah, David may have more up-to-date information, but there have been bills put forth in the legislature over the course of the past couple of years trying to repeal the bill that was passed in 2013 that caused all these structural changes. Those bills have been unsuccessful, unfortunately. But there were a couple of recent changes that were passed and that are being implemented. One of them went into effect this past December, or this is now. And that is that the board can vote to select its own chair and vice chair. So that in the immediate future is the case. But the issue is that with it's coming at a time where the board majority is no longer what it was for the past 2 years. So that is, a little bit suspicious over there. And then there was another change that was passed, another one where I believe the appointed members are going to be phased out in 2024. So it wouldn't be now, it would be later. But again, that is, another minor change to the several changes that they've made in terms of the structure of the Prince George's County school system. And there's still a lot of issues in terms of checks and balances of power that have not been addressed. So we may still see very many issues in the county, particularly the county's education system, because a lot of powers still lie with the superintendent that should lie with the board. And so those are issues that were not touched by the legislature. These are the two issues that did move forward and are being implemented in various ways. I will say when they passed the bill in 2013 to change the structure, it went into effect almost immediately. And now suspiciously, they are waiting some time to implement these changes to revert back to a better, more accountable system. So those are the most recent things that have passed. I don't know, David, if there's anything additional of what may be coming that you know of to add.
Yeah. Thanks for summing those up. And I mean, it's also important to note kind of we're swinging back that way in this elected direction. And that's because they got it so out of balance. They appointed such a crazy person as chair, and so much craziness they essentially brought on that they kind of ruined their own system, and now they have to move away. And to the point of politicians want this power and they want the control. They do want that. They also want to win re-election and go to higher office. So to the point when it starts to become a drag on them, which Angela's appointed members have been for our county executive, they've absolutely been hurting her. That is, I think, what finally pushed it over to be okay, you know what, just give it back. Let's give some of this power back because I don't want to be dragged into this anymore. So there's been some positive developments with that. The 2-year wait is very frustrating and kind of unnecessary. But like Raaheela said, also, we really need the power to pick our superintendent back. That's still currently picked by the county executive. The superintendent runs the day-to-day operations. So getting the board without the superintendent power to appoint doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I think will probably lead to further kind of conflict in terms of who they answer to. But yeah, some progress. I know our local delegation is taking it up again and still considering further tweaks, much like yours is, and hopefully weighing public feedback. But we're hoping to get things fully repealed and fully back as quickly as possible is the goal. But definitely a cautionary tale kind of for your delegation as we're moving back in the opposite direction that they're trying to move.
Yeah, and thank you again, both David and Raaheela. I think it was a great eye-opening interview that really hopefully does warn people in Howard County about what could be to come if we pass this. So I just have one last comment and question. And the comment is, David, you talk about that ethics, that sham ethics complaints against you guys, and I've talked to, I was talking to Shayla Adams Stafford on the Prince George's Board of Ed, and I was explaining to her what was going on, and her reaction was why would they be trying to do that? Didn't they see how big of a disaster it was in Prince George's County? Why would they think that was a good thing, a good idea to do in Howard County? And the point that I tried to make is, yeah, it did end up blowing up in the establishment's face in Prince George's County, but that was not at all a given. That was completely because David, Raaheela, Shayla, Ed, and the rest of them really effectively did rapid response, pushback, and did a good job getting their narrative out in the media, putting something out in Maryland Matters, getting organizations to speak up. But if you all didn't mobilize against this narrative, there is an alternate universe where perhaps those ethics reports did end your career, and they were successful in ousting you all. And so I want to make that point to say, sure, you all kind of ended up on top to some degree, but it could have went a different way. And I'm not confident that we are as well organized here in Howard County, and that if something like this does get passed and they do try to do a similar thing against the grassroots members on our Board of Education, I mean, hopefully we can get organize a similar resistance. But my point is to anybody in Howard County watching this, let's not let it get to that point in the first place, because I'm sure David and Raaheela wish that they, didn't have to experience that in the first place, even though they did end up being exonerated. But so my last question, just if both of you want to give any closing thoughts, I probably know the answer to this, but what is your advice or recommendation to Howard County? Should we adopt these appointed members, or should we stick with elected members? We start with
push back. Just push back as best as you possibly can now. You don't know what this is a pivotal moment in the future of your structure. And if you want to make sure that you have a voice at the table that is not diluted, a voice at the table when it comes to some of the serious decisions that are being made, then you want to push back on this proposal as best as you can. And that's coming from an objective perspective. It's coming from my subjective experience. But just know that this is an incredibly pivotal moment in time in terms of democracy when it comes to education in your county. And you have the ability to be able to have your voice be heard now, so that you can keep your voice at the table later.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Push back. Definitely take all of the time and energy that you can to plan around this, because losing on this bill is like losing 2 seats just off of the top. I'm sure some members of the delegation that probably won't move no matter what, some that'll probably be with you no matter what. So I would really kind of focus on whoever those swing people are. The only thing the benefit is that you're lobbying elected officials, not appointed officials. So if you do organize and rally their actual constituents, their super voters, they definitely will listen a whole lot more. And so I would really focus on trying to get direct outreach from people that live in their districts. I can tell you as an elected official, I might read emails that come from other parts of the county, but when somebody's like, hey, I live in your district and I feel this way, I'm like, I take note of it. And when I get a lot of emails in my district that say I feel this way, then I usually vote for it. And that's how a lot of elected officials feel. So, to your point, if you all hadn't pushed back and hadn't, right now you're working towards that in terms of raising public awareness. If you hadn't done these things, they would have passed it through. And, it could have been nearly unanimous. But because you are, you can start to pick off some of those elected officials who will call the county exec and be like, hey, I thought I could do it. I can't do it. This is too much heat. I don't need this. And so I would say definitely keep pushing, and hopefully you all can be successful.
Yeah, no, I think that's very good advice, and we'll take that into account. I think this podcast is a very good step in showing this perspective from a county who's done this and the disaster that it can be. And the other thing, we just have to keep clarifying what their true intention is, that this is a power grab for moneyed interests. And it's really gross because in Howard County they try to hide behind a guise of, no, we're actually doing this to help minority communities and underserved communities. And so we would appoint people that only care about those communities. Of course, it's actually going to help the county, when in reality, moneyed interests have never cared about those communities, and the policies that they implement have always, given those communities the short end of the stick. And so adding appointed members with that same agenda, it's pretty disgusting, and it's going to have the same outcomes that we've always had. So Shiri, I don't know if you had any final comments. No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again to our 2 guests, David Murray and Raaheela Ahmed, and wish you both luck with your future endeavors. And thank you everybody for tuning in to episode 22 of the Progressive Democrats of Howard County podcast. If you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on social media, become a member of our email list, become a dues paying member, et cetera, You can find all those links and more on our link tree at linktr.ee/HoCo progressives. Thank you, and see you next year.